Hello, it's Imogen Lamport from 16 Style Types, back with you now. Just waiting for Jill, will be on board with me in a moment. And we're going to chat any general style types questions here for you today. We have also just done a live video on the INFJ, the subtle stylist. Hi Sue, it's lovely to see you here again. So please do let us know what questions you have. Here's Jill, just going to pop her on. And then, hi Kiara, hi Kathy, it's lovely to see you here. Let us know your general questions. Hey Jill, back again.
Hi. Hi.
So we thought what we'd do is we'd talk a little bit about introversion and extroversion. So we've just done a blog post and a video on that blog post on our 16 Style Types page, so website. So if you go to 16styletypes.com, click on the articles menu tab, you will find it there. Very easy to find, introversion and extroversion. But Jill and I were just having a little discussion about this. You know, this is one of those things we start talking about stuff and go, no, we should hold on to that for one of these live chats. Always fascinating. About if you're kind of finding it hard to decide whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, that can be something that some people are kind of like, you know, going, I think I'm this or I think I'm that. And particularly when we hit midlife, I've heard a lot of people say, I used to be extrovert, but now I'm introvert. And that's a very common thing for people to say, but in fact it's no, you're still an extrovert most likely. If you're an you really are an extrovert. It's just, you know, I think there's that element of you can no longer burn the candle at both ends. You've realized that actually a bit of time alone is healthy as well as just spending time with people. But not all extroverts are the really out there life of the party sort of people. That often that's what we associate extroversion with, isn't it, Jill?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's true that extroverts gain energy from interaction, action, and being around people and things, whether or not that's a party or not. I mean, a party is a particular kind of gathering, and for some extroverts that is not their cup of tea.
No.
And also introverts can love going to parties. It's all very, very specific. So those kind of blanket statements tend to mislead and misguide rather than be helpful when we really want to get beyond the surface of what those terms mean. And of the 8 terms, the 4 dichotomies associated with psychological type, introversion and extroversion tend to be the 2 that have entered most commonly into popular parlance, and so they are used a great deal. They're also used in other tools apart from psychological types. So the Big 5 is another personality profiling tool that has extraversion as one of the 5, and that also has a specific meaning slightly different to our meaning here. And one of the reasons we don't believe in the term ambiversion is because that term is not required. When you understand psychological types and the dynamic nature of type, you realize that we just don't need the term ambiversion. It's completely superfluous because all of us use extroversion and all of us use introversion. If you really must use that term, then the answer is every single person on the face of the planet is an ambivert, because we all access and use them. We just don't do them in the same way, for the same reasons, for the same outcomes, in the same doses and at the same time. All of these things are a factor in knowing whether you prefer introversion or extroversion.
So you were telling me something a little bit earlier, Jill, that I'd love you to share here, because I think that was a really interesting and different thing about introverts versus extroverts that is a little less known.
Yeah, well, I've sat in a lot of workshops with a lot of executives and professionals in the workplace talking about these kinds of things. So a lot of my perspectives on these terms and these concepts has been informed by people sharing how they view and have experienced their own preferences. And one of the ways that I believe you can tell whether you're introverted or extroverted is how you use information from other people. So we all do this. We all receive input from other people, whether we ask for it or we don't. But the process is quite different for introverts as it is for extroverts. So extroverts will often come into an interaction, whether that's a meeting or just sitting down to dinner or whatever the circumstance is, from the small to the extremely significant. And they will be looking for, whether or not they're consciously aware of it or not, they'll be looking for input from other people. Oftentimes, extroverts do not know what they think and feel until they have talked it through with someone. This is a hallmark of extroversion, that they will start in one place and often end up in a different place. Now, what's interesting about that is, in the workplace particularly, but other interactions, introverts, because that's not how they do it, they can often find this a little bit alarming. I have heard introverts in workshops say, I feel that extroverts lie. They come into a meeting and they start here and they change their mind and they end up somewhere completely differently. And of course, this is incredibly illuminating to hear as an extrovert, that, we're perceived as liars. And of course, that's not what's happening from an extrovert perspective. We're not changing our minds, and the reason is because we never made them up to begin with. We've come into the interaction actively looking for input from other people, and so of course we're going to end up somewhere else. Other people's input is extremely conclusion shaping for extroverts. The opposite is often true for introverts, and this is why introverts are often accused of being intractable, that they do not change their perspective. And the reason for that, and I'll just talk about it as a concept and image, and as an introvert, I'm sure you'll be able to add to this. Introverts spend an inordinate amount of time in their internal world, which is a really interesting place to be. They think and feel very deeply about things, and the sharing part of it is often optional for an introvert. They themselves may feel very little compunction or need or even value in sharing their perspectives. It's often the social situation or the professional place requires them to share. But the sharing part is not to bounce ideas around and decide how they feel. They pretty much know what they think and how they feel about things before they open their mouths. And so the input from other people can be a bit invasive. It can be unnecessary. It's just not required for them to know what they think or how they feel, because they've gotten there already. And so one of the ways that you can look at whether you prefer introversion or extroversion is how persuasive, how conclusion shaping is the input that I get from other people, because for introverts, it is far less conclusion shaping than it is for extroverts.
Yes. I think, certainly for myself, I won't even open my mouth. I won't say a thing until I've already thought a lot about it. Now, sometimes I want a discussion with someone about something. Like, I love having a chat with Jill and we can throw around some ideas and stuff like that. But that's quite different from, say in a work environment when you might be, asked an opinion. Like, I don't even want to offer an opinion until I've figured it out in my head.
Yeah.
Like, and so sometimes this lack of wanting to talk about it can be because I'm actually not there yet in my own head, and I'm actually not ready to speak. Because I don't want to look like I'm flip-flopping or that might be okay in extroverts because that's how you make up your mind. I haven't actually got to that point yet. And so it actually can feel like it's too new, too fresh, too raw. I know for my own type, I really hate, not to be wrong, that's not the right word, but I really hate criticism. I think many of us hate criticism. Or what can feel like criticism or being dismissed or something. So I want to have really figured it out for myself before I speak about it. So, and I have no need often. I think that's the other thing is I've already had this internal conversation. I don't need to have an external one.
Right.
And a number of times my husband will go, oh, but did you think about this? I'm going, yeah, that was like 10 steps ago. That came up, some time back. That was something that came through my head and I thought about it and I, weighed up the pros and cons of it. And then I dismissed it or I took it on board, whatever that thing was. Like, I don't, I'm already 20 steps down here. by the time I'm
Yeah.
talking to you about it.
Yeah.
And so I think that can be something that is quite different, probably introvert to extrovert.
Yeah, exactly. And interactions between introverts and extroverts tend to look very different to interactions where there's only extroverts or only introverts. And there's a lot more silence when introverts are together. They don't feel the need to fill the space. And their energy doesn't tend to go up and up and up the more interaction that there is, which tends to be the case for extroverts. So this is not true in all circumstances with all extroverts, all the time. Of course, extroverts need contemplation and quiet time for balance, but there's the rub, there's the important part, for balance. As an extrovert, life has just forced me to learn the value of reflection and contemplation, but it's made me do it. It's not something that I was naturally drawn to or felt that I had a need for psychological well-being and health. It's just been a factor in life, and introverts will often talk about it in the opposite way, that life has taught them the value of interacting with others in a way that is not how they would naturally do it. And so we all use the other function at some point in our life, hence the ambiversion concept coming in there. There's no such thing as a pure extrovert or a pure introvert. I mean, that's just crazy. Although there are unaware introverts and unaware extroverts, and we've all had interactions with those. It's very interesting to notice those. I have a couple of what I would call unaware extroverts in my world, and you can just see how they force themselves into situations and they draw focus, and sometimes they'll catch themselves in the midst of it going, oh, all of a sudden I'm the center of attention and I'm drawing all of this attention. But that awareness only comes in the middle of it, not at the beginning of it. So and of course the same is true for some introverts who are not aware of the impact that their behavior is having on particular interactions.
And Barbara, you're absolutely right. I mean, introverts will, they'll be, I'll consider other people's opinions, and minds might be changed, but it's interesting. It's one of those things I'll notice that often when another opinion comes in or something, I get a new piece of information, I'll then want to take it away and think about it. I don't want to have to, I don't want to change my mind right now. Like I need to then go and have an internal process before that. So, and this is something my husband's had to learn, where he might give me something, he now knows that he has to just let me sit, and I can, I might go, yep, you're right, I'm going to go and action that thing, and do whatever you said. But he's not getting an instant, yes, honey, you're right.
Yeah. And this can be the tension between introverts and extroverts. Extroverts, wanting to bounce things backwards and forwards, and we have learned this in our interactions as well. I have learned that I have to step away. This is what I step away, do something else, leave her alone. Sometimes I just pretend that you've gone on holiday, and I go through all this stuff for me so that I'm not badgering you for an answer. And there have been times when I have badgered you, although that wasn't what I was intending to do. That's how it's come across. It's like, just, could you give me more than 2 hours, please? And it's like, wow, I thought 20 minutes was a long period of time. This is what 2 hours has been. So this has happened as well. We all have to learn how to make the interaction work for the other when they're different to us.
Yes. So, and it's important too, because I've had to learn too that I do have to give a reaction back sometimes.
Emoticons are so helpful. Sometimes just that thumbs up, I tell you, oh, the thumbs up, that's just made my day. I'm happy now because I know I've been heard on some level.
And that's something that I know I've had to and I have to do it in my own personal relationship as well. I have to remember that you can't read my mind.
Yeah.
And then I do have to sometimes I did this thing, or I took that on board. I have to actually acknowledge it in some way. that I probably don't need to acknowledge my introvert friends in the same way. Don't know.
Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. My husband and I have a convention where I will sometimes say to him, acknowledge, please. Like, we must sound like we're on a military operation. I will just say, acknowledge. Because I just need, just give me a nod or yes, because nothing is death. No communication is death.
Yes. So yeah, it is one of those things. I think that it's interesting. So like that's one way of thinking about, if you're trying to think about, am I, you know, extrovert or introvert? It's what do I naturally go to, or how do my interactions happen? So now Sue just asked, do N and P have an impact on E and I, and choose which you are? J and P do, in that when you're saying N and P, I'm a bit confused because the N's a perceiving function and P is the
well, I mean, I guess the short answer is we talk in whole type, what's called whole type. So we've pulled out E and I just to discuss those as concepts. But yes, you're in. So, you know, for example, if you were looking at, say, ENFP or ESFP, then yes, they would certainly form part of that picture, and that's when you would go to the dynamic nature of type and look at what is a dominant function, and you know the difference between, you know, introverted sensing or extroverted feeling. So yes, there is a whole picture at play, for sure. Yeah, which is one of the reasons why our best fit process is designed the way that it is. We put extroversion and introversion at the end of it, and most professional, or even some of the freebie surveys, will put introversion and extroversion first, and we deliberately didn't do that because it can mislead.
Yeah, and I think too that knowing whether you're E or I, kind of the JP can also influence that decision, because it's, well, do I do the extroverted function first or do I do that second? And I think that's really, you know, which one is the dominant one for me? So as a J, even though I'm a J and I want to come to closure, I will still appear slightly more like a P because my perceiving function is my dominant function. So I will take longer than Jill will, who is an EJ, to make a decision. Or my husband, who's an EJ. So that's where it kind of like, you know, I can't be rushed into a decision in the way that an EJ is probably going down that, because their dominant function is their judging function. Katie said, is it fair to say that you are one type that leans towards another ISFJ that leans toward ENFJ sometimes? I'm going to let you answer that, Jill.
We don't tend to talk in terms of those kinds of you know, terms. So the basic theory is that your personality preferences are as inborn as your physical characteristics, and they do not change over time, those innate preferences. What does change is that you respond and react and are shaped by certain circumstances in your life, and you develop as a human being. We are not static beings. We are not the same, you know, 66 as we were when we were 16. And so we get to keep our life experiences as we go through life. And so something like looking at ISFJ leaning towards ENFJ, what that would suggest to me, looking at that, is an ISFJ. Let's look at ISFJ, introverted sensing, as dominant function. So this is often something that's unconscious, our dominant function, we just use it so much. Extroverted feeling is the auxiliary function for ISFJ. Extroverted feeling is the dominant function for ENFJ. And so what I would look at with those two particular types is a person with a preference for ISFJ who is maturing and developing in a healthy and a natural way, and finding themselves being drawn to more extroverted feeling activities, which of course is the world in which ENFJs live, ESFJs as well. And so that's how I would make sense of that kind of thing. And of course, what's also true is that just because you have a preference for one type or one set of preferences doesn't mean you can't draw on and use those from others. And in fact, it's something that we advocate at 16 style types, is learning from the other 15 style types. What do they do well? What's unique about their approach to style, their attitudes and behaviors that we can draw on? We just had a conversation about INFJs, and one of the things that they can teach all of us us is the value of that authentic, unique style expression and being true to yourself and having that vision. That's something all of us can learn from, whether or not we have a preference for introverted intuition or not. So that's how I would make sense of that kind of thing. I wouldn't use that particular terminology that you used in the question, although if you find it helpful, then, you know, we all make sense of this in our own way. That's how I would make sense of that.
I think too, thinking about something like that is, if you're naturally more ISFJ, have ISFJ preferences, you still have intuition. It's just not a dominant, you know, it's your, you know, fourth function. It's your less developed. But especially as we go through life, we learn more. We learn how to do things. Like any skill in a way, we can learn to develop those skills a bit. But if you imagined that if you had to just intuit all day, every day, and you weren't allowed to have details, and all you could look at was the big picture, and you want, you know, and theories and big pictures, imagine you were put in a situation where it was all theories and big pictures. How would that make you feel? It probably would make you feel really uncomfortable. Where you can go, I can go there for short periods of time, but I can't go there all day, every day. Like, just as I can get into the detail when I have to, if all I ever did was highly detailed work, I would be wanting to kill myself. You know, so I think that's where that we all have, really, we all have all the, you know, we all have intuition, we all have sensing, we all have thinking, we all have feeling. It's just what's in our code is what is more dominant. It's what's more obvious. It's where we go first. And so that's where I think that, and particularly in midlife, like I notice myself, I draw a lot more on my sensing for my relaxation now than I did when I was younger. So I do sensing activities like sewing and painting and exercise and those sort of things I'd say are more sensing related activities are the way to get outside of my head, because as an intuitive I will spend an inordinate amount of time in there. And I know too, like Kate, my beautiful assistant who has ISFJ preferences, one of her favorite things to do for fun is go to an escape room, where what you have to do is get the clues and figure out. So it's very much using her intuition to actually figure out the kind of how to get out this escape room. Like for me, I go, God, I don't like puzzles. Like I just can't be bothered, because I spend my entire time doing that sort of thing, like figuring out my own sort of puzzles. So I don't need to do that for that's not relaxation for me. But for her, it is. It's something she really enjoys. And I think this is where often that we can have this, well, which one am I? Because I enjoy doing this and I enjoy doing that. But I know I couldn't just do that. And I think that's where what is most natural is what you're really looking for.
And, you know, it's also true that you can read the descriptions of the 16 style types or 16 types and find yourself relating to aspects of more than one of them. I know myself, I look at the 16 types, and with a few exceptions, like I never think I might be an INTP. That never comes up for me. There's a number of them that I think, I can see myself there. I'm sometimes mistaken for an intuitive because I'm considered ideasy and creative, which I am, but in my own way. I personally never mistake myself for an intuitive, but I access intuition. It's just I do it in a different kind of way. I mean, I love to brainstorm and toss ideas around, but here's what makes me different from a dominant intuitive, particularly a dominant extroverted intuitive of ENFP or ENTP, is there's a time limit to how long I find it enjoyable, and it starts to exhaust me after a certain period of time, and it starts to annoy me. It's like, okay, enough with the ideas. What are we doing? What's practical? And this is one of the key things that can distinguish. So if you look at the types and you say, yeah, I can do that, I enjoy that, that's probably not going to help you to decide what your preferences are, because certainly the more experiences you have in life, the more things you can do. This is to be expected. This is part of developing in a multifaceted world. We have to develop lots of skills and abilities. Doesn't mean
Jill's just frozen there for a second. Yeah, it just doesn't mean that, you know, that's what you are innately. And I think that's the whole thing about psychological type. It's really about innate preference rather than skills and behaviors that have been learned. And I think particularly workplaces can be places that you learn a lot of skills that aren't naturally what you are. And this is why a lot of people, I think they have a judging, they might be a J. And so especially with a lot of the questionnaires, which ask for a kind of how do you deal with schedules and deadlines, and do you do all these things, that you go, well, I've been doing these things for years for work. And so therefore I can do them. And because I can do them, then I must be the J, rather than I've learnt to do that way, but really I would maybe rather spend a bit more time learning, but I just haven't had that as an option. And so I think that's, you know, that's just a way to look at it. So we might finish up. Jill's just, you know, like broken down. But I'm thinking we've done, you know, I'm trying to think, we've done a good half hour here today. So I think I might just finish up and say thank you so much for watching, and we'll be back again next month. Bye for now.